Hey out there, I'm Tom Dreesen, and I'm back on Jim on Bass. I'm excited. How about you?
The Jim on Bass Show has teamed up with my new friends at Old Hillside Bourbon Company. I got two of my favorite bottles here, Straight Bourbon Whiskey and the Straight Rye Whiskey. So whenever you want to get on base with that authentic Kentucky bourbon taste, make sure you visit oldhillsidebourboncompany.com, their social media, Old Hillside CO, or pick up a bottle at Bevmo and Total Wine. Old Hillside Bourbon Company. They'll always get you on base. Welcome back to another episode of the Jim on Bass Show. For today's very special guest, we have on a friend of the show returning. He spent over 50 years in show business. He's been on The Tonight Show over 60 times. He's toured with the likes of Frank Sinatra, Smokey Robinson, Sammy Davis Jr., and many others. He hails from Harvey, Illinois. Please welcome the great Tom Dreesen. Thanks for coming back on.
Wait, I want to hear the welcome. Oh, yeah, thank you very much. I'm glad to be back, Jimmy. Welcome in town, by the way. You're a stranger in town here, right?
Yeah, it came down from the Bay Area, and we're in your house, so thanks for letting me in. This is going to be fun.
You're more than welcome. I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, glad to be here. And I thought it was interesting. I was going to bring it up. Your good friend David Letterman, now that he's kind of somewhat retired, he's got the beard, and you're rocking the goatee, so you guys got the facial hair.
Well, I thought that when David retired from television that he was going to just go hide somewhere, but instead he grew this big beard. I said, if you're worried about people recognizing you, now they all recognize you, They're not sure if it's you or Santa Claus, but David's still very active. He's got a show on, is it Netflix? He interviewed, President Obama. He interviews the big stars. And, unfortunately, I'm not big enough to be on his show, but I'm on your show, Jimmy. Probably more important. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's all that matters, right? Well, you're busier than ever, right? You told me how you're doing some filming with your buddy Tim Reed, so it's got to be fun.
Yeah, today, I'm in busier more than I really want to be at some points. I'm always on the road. I got a one-man show that I do, a 90-minute show called The Man Who Made Sinatra Laugh. It's about my 14 years of touring with Frank Sinatra, but it's stand-up comedy. But then I do some storytelling, and I have visuals, and also video of Frank and I together. It's a fun show, really, to do. So I do that around the country at theaters. I do motivation talks on 4 subjects: perception, visualization, self-talk, and develop a sense of humor. And I elaborate on those. And in fact, I'm doing one at the Comedy Store coming up May 27th or something like that. But today, Tim Reed and I were America's first black and white comedy team. Tim Reed, for those of you who know, and those who don't know, I'll explain, later became a Venus Flytrap on WKRP Cincinnati, and he was on a show called Sister Sister. He played the father. Very successful actor, director. But we started out in show business day one. He had never been on stage, nor I. But in 1969, we went on stage as America's first black and white comedy team. In history shows we were the last. We did it for about 6 years when there weren't any comedy clubs in America. So we did what they affectionately call the Chitlin Circuit, among other clubs, but that's black-owned, black-operated nightclubs. And so Tim and I did that all across the land. The Sugar Shack in Boston, the High Chaparral in Chicago, the Burning Spear, the Cotton Club, the Dating Club Lounge, the 20 Grand in Detroit. Motown was in Detroit in those days. So that was part of it. So they're now doing a documentaries on the history of black comedy. And so they brought Tim and I on today. Tiffany Haddish, my little friend, I've known her since she was in the ghetto. I really know her when she was a poor young kid. And so anyhow, she interviewed Tim and I, and it was really fun. We like 2 hours, we just went off all the funny, crazy things we did in that era,
Yeah, excited to see that come out. And we spoke about that last time and your great career together and playing those clubs. And speaking of, looking back a little bit, since I've talked to you, the writer's strike happened too. And it made me wonder, did you join the picket line? And it kind of made me think about your time organizing the comedy strike back in the 70s, right?
I'm not in the Writers Guild, so I didn't do that. But I was on the road almost all that time that was going on, even though it lasted for a long time. I'd come off the road and go back out again, But those, in your 55 years in show business, you realize those things pop up all the time, and I suppose it's all for the good,
Well, it's good to see you again. And like you said, you're still performing. So I've been seeing you pop up at like the Comedy Store, I think maybe the Laugh Factory. So what determines when you pop in? Is it just an itch, or is it like something's coming up and you're trying to tune up?
Well, I'm always working on new material my whole career. When I started doing the Tonight Shows, as you pointed out, I did 61 appearances on the Tonight Show. You had to come up with a new 5 minutes every time you did the Tonight Show. And Johnny didn't want guy goes in a bar jokes. He wanted original monologues. So I was always writing new material. So it was a habit of mine. But now when I come off the road, there's the Flappers in Burbank. There's the Comedy Chateau in North Hollywood. There's the Laugh Factory on Sunset Boulevard. There's the Comedy Store. And they send you, emails, your availabilities, So I go, on Friday, Saturday nights, and I always write new material like during the weekend. I'll go there and try it out at one of those clubs. And it's just a lot of fun for me. And incidentally, it's also a sharp career move for young people today, and even me. But when I started out as a stand-up comedian, there was a stairway to stardom, The Tonight Show. Wherever you went in America, and I discussed this with you last time, but wherever you go in America, and when I started out as a single, or even as with the comedy team, but in 1975, when the team broke up and I was alone, everywhere you went, people say, "What do you do for a living?" You say, "I'm a stand-up comedian." They'd say, "Wow. Have you ever been on Johnny Carson show?" That was the next question out of their mouth. Have you ever been on Johnny Carson? Because one appearance on the Tonight Show, and your career was launched. Freddie Prinze did one appearance, got a sitcom the next day. So, in the eyes of America, you really weren't a comedian unless you've been on the Johnny Carson show. So I was always in the habit of writing new jokes and new monologues, and all that stuff. And now it's just like a habit with me of trying out new material. But I'm again going back to the social media. In those days, you had to do the Tonight Show. Today, you don't have to. You can go on Instagram. You can go on TikTok. You can go on Twitter. You could get 2, 3, 4, 5 million viewers in one night. Dane Cook started out. He did MySpace. When it first came out, he was filling up 15,000-seat arenas. So you can go to the Comedy Store and do a 15-minute bit, or the Flappers, or the Laugh Factory, or the Comedy Chateau, and in the old days, we took our tape recorder and we listened to our tapes, and so we'd know what material works. Now they film you while you're on, and they send you that film. Flappers the other night, I did a set. By the time I got home, they already sent me the link on my email. Now you can look at that link and you can take out 1 minute of there, edit it, and put it out on Instagram that night, and pick up viewers. It's just amazing, the new strategy for getting known as a stand-up comedian today.
Well, you speak about technology then, and I was wondering, now with like the cell phone, you can, if you get an idea, you can just type it in there, right? So through the years, did you have like a joke book though? Is that how you kept track of things?
Years ago I did, and had a joke book. Now you can talk into your cell phone now as soon as you get an idea. I would never go anywhere without a notepad and a pencil or pen in my pocket, because I'd be talking to you and you'd say something. I'd say, oh, I know how I can make that funny, Or I'd witness something and say, if that happened, it would be funnier than what really happened. I'd write that down, So, but today you can talk into your cell phone, and memo, yeah.
Well, what's the most amount of shows you've done in a week? I don't know if you know Craig Conant, younger comedian. I had him on, and he said how a few years back when he was still trying to make it, get on at the Comedy Store, get on at the Improv, he did like 18 shows in a week. So did you have any marathon stretches where you're just banging them out around town?
My earlier days, yeah. When I first started out with the comedy team, there weren't any comedy clubs in America, none. So we started out, we had to put together a nightclub act. We went to nightclubs. You couldn't say, we're going to go to open mic night and try this new 3 minutes. There weren't any places like that. So we had to put together a nightclub act. And sometimes you wouldn't work for a month. Me and Tim would rehearse in front of the mirror. We'd be rehearsing all the time. When I came out here to the West Coast, then there were comedy clubs were starting to pop up. At one time, the Comedy Store was the only game in town in L.A., and then the comedy clubs started popping up. But when I was getting ready to do the Tonight Show, do a 5 minutes on the Tonight Show, I tell you, there was a time where I had done like 20 Tonight Shows, so I had carte blanche. Anytime I wanted to do the Tonight Show, I would call them and say, I'm available on March 18th, say, whatever. They'd say, okay, Tom, you're down, because they knew I knew what they wanted. They wanted a monologue of original material, and they wanted funny stuff when you sat down and talked to Johnny. Now, what I would do, Jim, sometimes I didn't have any material. New material, but I want to force myself to write. So necessity is the mother of invention. So I would call the Tonight Show and say, I'll be ready in 3 weeks. They'd say, you're down, Tom. I don't have the first joke. Now I get manic, right? Take my tape recorder and I'm going, and everything I saw was funny, and I'm writing that down. And it would force me to get in the groove of writing new material. Because a wise, I can't even remember who it was. I've done 1,000 interviews in my life. One time a while back, a guy said, "Are you a writer who's a comedian? Or are you a comedian who's a writer?" I said, "Wow, that's a very interesting question." I would have to say I'm a comedian who's a writer because I love stand-up comedy. I don't love writing. It's okay, but I don't love it. I don't look forward to it. So I used to have to force myself to get into a writing mode by telling them I'm ready in 3 weeks, and when I wasn't ready, And so again, I repeat, necessity is the mother of invention, So that's how I wrote material.
Well, when you are jumping up, getting on the stage, is there anyone that you like to see? Any comedians out there that kind of catch your ear?
Today, you mean?
Yeah, today.
In my life, look, I loved comedians before I was one. I never thought I'd be a comedian, never thought I'd ever be in show business. But if I saw a comedian working anywhere. When I started out, in 1969 when I started out, they had a survey. It was like 3 of every 2,000 or 3,000 people, I can't remember, had ever seen a comedian live in those days, because there weren't any comedy clubs. So you had to see them on TV or something, or in a movie. But then when comedy clubs burst all over the country, there was like 550 at one time. There were 3 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So you could see comedians anywhere you wanted to see, So I again, anytime I saw somebody get up on the stage and try to make people laugh, I said, wow, they had my heart. I thought that was, what a great gift, So today, when I finish at the Laugh Factory or the Comedy Store, I sometimes stick around and watch the next couple acts, or get there early and watch a couple before me. So a while back, I'm working at the Comedy Store with Sebastian Maniscalco and Bill Burr. We were on the same show, So I naturally watch them, and as well as the new kids I've never heard of before. I want to watch and see what they say, and what their approach to it is. And the other reason I go to these comedy clubs now, I want to stay in touch with that audience. Those audiences in those clubs I just mentioned, 21 to oldest 40, and I want to see if my material still relates to that audience as well,
Well, you speak about the Comedy Store and all the history there too, and you had told me last time about the remodel that they did. So it made me wonder, do you have a favorite room there? Is it the original room, or?
Well, the original room is where that was the Comedy Store when I started out. There wasn't the main room and the belly room. They had a little section called the Comedy Store. And when Mitzi bought out the rest of Mitzi Shore, who owned the club, she bought out the rest of the building. Art LeBeau had a 50s club in there, and she bought that out, and then she turned it into a main. That's main room is a 400-seater. So, I like working them both. When I work the main room, it's almost like working in Vegas. When you work the original room, it's a little intimate room, But they're both, they're both real good rooms, to work,
And it's cool, like the original room, to see the old neon signs still on the wall, like Letterman, Pryor. So a lot of history in there, as you know.
A lot of history.
Do people ever ask you, I imagine people, like, why do you still perform? Like, why are you still doing it? And just because you love it, right?
Yeah, because I'll tell you a story. Many years ago, I was working at Harrah's in Lake Tahoe with Sammy Davis Jr., and George Burns was appearing next door at Caesars in Lake Tahoe. And I had done the Dean Martin roast with George Burns. We roasted him. But I knew him from the business, so I went over to see his show. He was 95 years old. He didn't run out to the microphone, but when he got out there, he did an hour and 10 minutes of funny stuff. After the show, I went backstage to say hello, and he was in the dressing room. He was looking at 3x5 cards. I said, "Hey, George, how you doing?" He looked up. He said, "Oh, hi, Tommy." He said, "I was working on some new material tonight." I said, "That's what I want to do. I want to be 95 years old working on new material." It's still a lot of fun for me, Jimmy. I love making people laugh. I'm not going to do it for you, but I wrote a poem many years ago, and the opening lines are, "As far back as I can remember, or shortly thereafter, I love to hear the sound of laughter." And the poem goes on. But that to this day, I love making people laugh, and I love writing new material and trying it out that night. And when it works, the elation you feel, Stand-up comedy is the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. When it works, it's a killer. When it doesn't work, it's a downer,
Well, that's great. I had Nick Swartzen on. He kind of said a similar thing. Being able to think of something and then go on stage that night, and how there's nothing like it.
Think about this. A stand-up comedian is an artist. Would you disagree that we're artists? Now, our art, we can think of something funny that day, as he pointed out, and that night you get approval. that it worked. How many artists, painters, they're dead 100 years before their art sells. Or maybe they don't sell any paintings in their lifetime. But we can think of something during the day and go try it that night, It's a great, it's the best profession on the planet, bar none. I could talk about this for hours. I'll try to make it short. But laughter is healing. That's not a theory anymore. Used to be, making laugh makes you feel better. It was a theory that laughter is healing. They now know, first of all, they've always known laughter is a deterrent. The brain can't think of two thoughts at the same time. So if you're watching a comedian and you're laughing, you're not thinking of your problem. So it's psychologically a deterrent. But because of a man named Norman Cousins, who was the editor of a magazine called Saturday Review, he was dying in the hospital, heart condition. The doctors told him years of negative input, stress, had made him ill. He didn't have long to live. He was laying in the hospital and he thought, if negative input, stress made me ill, then positive input should make me well. He checked out of the hospital. He would only watch I Love Lucy reruns, Candid Camera, Three Stooges, The Marx Brothers. He wouldn't watch the evening news, wouldn't read the newspapers, listen to comedy albums. He lived 27 years after the doctors told him he was going to die. Because of him, UCLA did research and found out that when the human body laughs, when you have a real hearty laugh, you laugh so hard, and after the laugh, tears are coming out of your eyes, and like this, that sense of well-being comes over. Your body's gone through an actual chemical change. Endorphins are released from the brain into the bloodstream. So your body's gone through a chemical change. So laughter is not only psychologically a deterrent, it's physiologically therapeutic. So comedians are physicians of the soul. So you can call me Dr. Dreesen if you'd like.
No, good point, Dr. Dreesen. One of my favorite things to do is after going to the Comedy Store or the Improv, I like going to In-N-Out Burger or something unhealthy after. So last time I had you on, you talked about going to Cantor's. So I had to go and check it out. I had some food there. So do you still pop in?
No.
Okay.
I've been there in years. But that was the place when we were brand new. I'm on stage every night with these unknown comedians at the Comedy Store. David Letterman, Jay Leno, Robin Williams, Gallagher, Michael Keaton. The girl waiting, Elaine Boozler, by the way, a wonderful stand-up comedian. The girl waiting tables was Deborah Winger, Afterward, we'd all run over to Cantor's, and we'd hang there till, comedians are hangout people. Most show business people. Frank Sinatra, I toured with him 14 years. You know what he loved to do after the show? Hang out. He stayed up till dawn. He never went to bed till the sun came up. But we like to hang out and tell stories and stuff like that. And so that Cantor's was a perfect place to do that.
And didn't you do like a lot of organizing at Cantor's, like for the strike back then? Or
what happened is that I was on the road touring with Sammy Davis at that time. I had launched out of the Comedy Store to the Tonight Show, from the Tonight Show into Las Vegas. I was doing Dinah Shore, Merv Griffin, Mike Douglas, Johnny Carson, Midnight Special, rock concert, Soul Train. I'm the only white comedian to ever do Soul Train. I was doing a $20,000 pyramid, Match Game, Hollywood Squares. I was on my way. I was making six figures a year, touring with Sammy. Every time I'd come home, I'd go to the Comedy Store and try out new material for the next Tonight Show. One night, I called when I came home. Yeah, Tom, come in Saturday. I go over, and I think I'm in the original room, and Mitchie had, as I said earlier, had bought out Art LeBeau and had the main room. Well, what she would do, she'd put like Jackie Mason, Rodney Dangerfield, Buddy Rich, whoever wanted to work that room, 400-seater, whatever they charged at the door went to the artist. Mitchie took the drinks and the food and the alcohol, and stuff. So that's what they got the door. So when I went there that Saturday night and I was going to go on stage at the original room, they said, "Oh, Tom, you're in the main room." I said, "The main room?" The main room. I went in the main room and it's Robin Williams, Leno, Letterman, me, Elaine, Boozler. Anyhow, I went on stage. I said, "Why? I feel like I'm back in Vegas in this big room." I didn't think anything of it. I go over to the Cantor's afterward. We're hanging out. Jay Leno comes in. He said, "Hey, this is bullshit, man. I mean, the other artists get the door. Maybe it took 5 of us to fill the room, but the room was filled, So the comics all decided to have a meeting. I went to the meeting, and they were all talking about, what they should do. What we should do this. And it was all disorganized. To get 100 comedians in a room was like a madness. I had been in the JCs back in Illinois, so I knew the Robert's Rules of Order. I knew how to conduct a meeting. So I decided this. I went to the second meeting, and they were same thing, all disorder. And I started chairing the meeting and got them organized. All right, he has the floor. Gallagher has the floor. All right, make your point. All right, Jay, and we get a second emotion.
To be a fly on the wall, that would be great.
Oh, it was really, really interesting because first of all, and then they formed committees and subcommittees. Once you got them organized, they were a force to be reckoned with. These were sharp young kids. So anyhow, and eventually, Mitchie did not want to pay, and the comedians wanted to be paid, and it was a nightmare. And the comedians decided to go on strike. The last thing I wanted to do was go on strike. I had been in the Teamsters in Chicago, working, before I was ever in show business, working on a loading dock as a Teamster. After 6 months, I dropped my card and I became management. I dropped my Teamster card and became management. Now I had 48 guys working for me that were my Teamster buddies, and now I was the enemy, But I'd been there and done that, and I knew it was a nightmare. So I didn't want to strike or anything like that, but the comedians voted on it, and I thought it might last overnight. It lasted 8 weeks. It was something that was a tough time in my career. Because I turned down, at that time, $50,000 worth of work with Sammy Davis, because I called Sammy and said, Sammy, I'm in a fight. And he knew what it was about. He said, don't worry about it, Tom. You can come with me when it's over with. I'm thinking still at the time, a week or two. Ever since I was a kid, I'm a little guy. I'm 5'9", I weigh 152 pounds now, but I was even littler than that when I was growing up. And I played football, I played basketball, and I grew up in a predominantly black area. I played with tough kids, street kids, but I was a little guy, so I always had to play harder than everybody else, harder, every sport I played. When I went in the service, I boxed when I was in the Navy a little bit. I didn't want to fight, but when I got in the ring, I wanted to win. And any fight I get into, I want to win. And so consequently, that's the way stand-up comedy is for me. It's a challenge, but I want to win. I prepare myself. So when the strike started, I'm in a fight now, and I'm not going to give up till we win. And it lasted 8 weeks. And eventually we got paid, and, today comedians get paid all over the country, and it was because of that initial effort that those young comedians put out. I give them so much respect, those who walk the line with me,
Well, you speak on that and you give motivational speeches. So I was just wondering, do you like to give back also because of guys like Sammy Davis Jr.? And you mentioned how your older brother always looked out for you last time. So is that kind of your way of giving back, or because people have treated you good?
Absolutely. There's no question about it. What you sow, you shall reap. You have to, all this knowledge that you have, if you're an engineer, if you're a pilot, all this knowledge you weren't born with. People transferred that knowledge to you, and you picked up some new knowledge. Maybe it's a must. You have to pass that on. God's been good to me. I've had a tough life, a struggle. I grew up with 8 kids, lived in a shack. We talked about this before. Both my parents were alcoholic at one time. I shined shoes in taverns. I set pins in bowling alleys. I caddied in the summertime. I sold newspapers on the corner, all to help feed my brothers and sisters. None of this do I regret. But I had a lot of, it's like God said, the first half of your life, Tom, I'm going to put a load on you. But if you survive, the second half is on me. And that's exactly the way it's been. The second half has just been incredible, So I got to pass it on. Yeah, any knowledge I have, I got to pass it on.
That's a good way to put it. Well, do you have any jokes that you've kept around your whole career that kind of like almost like a greatest hits for a band that you're always ones that you stick with?
I change my material all the time. But there's certain jokes a comedian will have that they know this is a killer joke. And they will know that if, like some nights you're out there and it might be a tough crowd, but you do that killer joke, and if it doesn't get a laugh, you realize it's not me, it's them. An old singer many years ago, you wouldn't hear him, but a guy named Al Jolson, he sold out the Winter Garden Theater for 13 straight years every single night. He was an incredible performer in those days. He used to say there's no such thing as a bad audience, only a bad performer. Well, I think he's full of it, because I met a few bad audiences in my life. But, so yeah, there's one joke, you've probably heard me say. I went back to my school reunion, and one of my teachers came up to me, an old guy, and he said, "You don't remember me?" But I said, "Yes, I do. Your name is Richard Bruno, and you teach algebra." He said, "That's amazing." I said, "Listen to this. X to the 5th power times X to the 5th power is X to the 10th power, because in algebra, you don't multiply exponents, you add them." He said, "That's incredible." I said, "You know what else is incredible? That's the first time I've ever been able to use that since you taught it to me." Now that always got a laugh from the first time I wrote it, first time I showed it, always got a laugh. So if I'm having a tough time out there some night and I do that and it doesn't get a laugh, I say, "Okay, I'm cool now. It's you, it ain't me."
It's a bunch of nerds in the audience.
Yeah.
Well, what do you remember about your first open mic? How did it go, and where was it?
The first time I witnessed that, Tim Reed and I were a comedy team, And we had been a comedy team for a couple of years. There weren't any comedy clubs in America when we started, as I pointed out. And in Chicago, there weren't any at all. So we went to New York. We heard about this place, The Improvisation. We went to New York to try to audition for some TV shows. We actually took a bus. You know, he had a wife and 2 kids. I had a wife and 3 kids. We didn't have a lot of money. And we took a bus, 20-something hours on a bus. And
No headphones or iPad.
Oh, no, nothing like that at all. But anyhow, we went to New York, and we went to this place, The Improvisation. Bud Friedman, who later became a dear friend of mine, but he put us on one night, and we, he was a busy guy and a tough guy, and he served in Korea, was wounded, and I said, could we get a chair? I need a chair on the stage. There's a bit we do. I don't know. We got a chair around here. I said, we'll need 2 mics. We don't have 2 microphones, So he had 1 microphone. So Tim would do a line and hand it to me, and I'd do the line. We handed it back, and we bombed all over the place, But that was the first time I had experienced what an open mic was, what they call that. But I thought, wow. The comedians from New York can come here every night and work on the material. Sometimes Tim and I would have a gig and not have another gig for a month. So we needed a place like that. I went back to Chicago, and I went to a club owner. He owned a place called Le Pub. It was a restaurant, and it was very busy most of the time. But I said, what is your weakest night? He said, Monday night's a bad night. I said, could I do an open mic night? And I was explaining to him what it was, because Chicago didn't have a place like that. He said, yeah, and I went on a bunch of radio shows, and I promoted it, and it became very successful. It was the first comedy club Chicago ever had. And then after a while, that he didn't want to do that. He actually turned it into a gay bar. And so on Monday nights, it was packed. It was, gay bar night, something new in Chicago. And then, so I went to a place called the Pickle Barrel. And it was the same thing. The guy let me do it. So, I brought open mics to Chicago,
Wow. Well, eventually you got your own TV show, so made me wonder, what's the feeling of that when you walk out and the crowd's hyped up for you? I mean, I imagine, is that similar to obviously being a comedian on a stage?
Yeah, what happened was the ABC in Chicago, there was a guy named Joe Ahern who was running ABC, and he really liked me, and he had seen me perform many times, and he said, you know what, Oprah Winfrey's going on hiatus for a week. Her studio will be open. He said, I want you to do whatever you would bring in there. And I put together a late night talk show with the help of some friends of mine, a woman named Cynthia Petrazo in Chicago who used to work for Phil Donahue's show. She helped me produce this, put this together. I got Paul Black, who was with The Tonight Show at one time, one of the talent coordinators. He flew in, and we put together a show following Nightline. Well, Nightline was a big show at that time, so they called it Nighttime, starring Tom Dreesen. And so, I hosted that show for a week, and it was a huge success, and we thought for sure we were going to do a late-night talk show out of Chicago, but ABC, through a bunch of dumb suits at ABC that didn't, they were just dumb. They had another show that they were trying to promote, and they went for that, and it went into the tank. And hosting a late night talk show for me was a lot of fun because, first of all, I love stand-up comedy, and I love interviewing people, and especially there's something that's so much fun about our business when everybody came to see you. When I first started out, Jack Benny, a great old comedian, he gave me some advice one time. He said, Tommy, when you first walk out on that Tonight Show, your first time, that was the furthest thing from my mind at that time. I'd been in business like 4 months in Tonight Show. But he said, don't walk out. There's 28 million people watch that show. Don't walk out to 28 million strangers who've never seen you before and start talking about the government or the airlines. Talk about you. Tell them about where you're from, Harvey, Illinois. He asked me where I was from. I said, he said, talk about Harvey. Talk about how many brothers and sisters? 8. Talk about that. Where'd you go to school? Catholic school? Talk about that. Jokes, right? Mm-hmm. Jokes about. So after 6 minutes on the Tonight Show in front of 28 million people, and they laughed, you walk off and they say, wasn't he funny? And his accent, he's from the south side of Chicago, Harvey, Illinois. He had 8 brothers and sisters. He went to Catholic school. He played basketball on an all-black basketball team, et cetera, et cetera. You left part of you out there. He said, once you're a star, he said, you can walk out and talk about whatever you want. When that audience is full of people that came to see you, they don't need to know your history. They already know you. That's when you can talk about any subject matter. But your earlier days, walk out and talk about where you're from and all that. So you're introducing yourself to these strangers. Well, by the time I did my talk show in Chicago, they all knew me. So it was fun to come out and talk about anything that was going on. God, I had a lot of fun on that show.
I have a memory my dad wanted me to ask you. Curious if you probably remember it, but you were a guest on the Mike Douglas show, and there was someone, I guess, who just happened to be in the audience that looked just like you, and they were joking how it was like your twin brother or look-alike. Do you remember that?
Your dad wanted me to ask you that?
Yeah.
I did maybe 40 or 50 Mike Douglas shows. In those days, it was out of Philadelphia. So anytime you were going to New York, you'd stop in Philly and do Mike Douglas. But I do remember that day. I remember he said, "We got a surprise for you." I said, Mike said, "Oh, we're going to surprise you." And there's this guy, and here's a surprise. There's a guy in the audience, so he's just like you. Let's bring him out. And this guy looked at me, and I looked at him, and I didn't see it. And Mike said, "How about that?" Let me tell you a funny story about people looking like you. Your whole celebrity career, I don't care if you're a baseball player, basketball player, there's always somebody that will tell you, you look just like my brother-in-law. And doesn't he, Agnes? Look at him, But years ago I was touring with Florence Henderson, who was on the show, The Brady Bunch. And Florence was a singer, and I was doing some shows with her. And we were working in a place called Casa Mañana in Dallas, Fort Worth. There's a place called the Casa Mañana, in a theater. And so after the show, this one night, I went in her dressing room and I said, "Where do you want to go to dinner tonight? You want to go to Chinese food, or you want to?" And she was thinking about it. She had a robe on, and her manager came in, a female, and she came in. Kayla was her name, I remember. And she said, "Florence says the owner of the theater is out in front, and he has one of his dear friends and his wife, and they want to talk to you. Everywhere his wife went, they say she looks just like you." And Florence says, "Try to get me out of it, honey." I said, "No, wait a minute. Aren't you interested? Somebody looks just like you." She said, "Tommy, it happens to me all the time, and they don't look like me, and it's embarrassing for both of us." I said, "I'm going up front to get some popcorn." I said, "I'll come back, and by that time you'll be ready. We'll go get something to eat." Well, I go up front, the theater, and I come back, and now there's Florence outside her dressing room in her bathrobe, like with her arms like this, and there's a guy and his wife, and the owner of the theater, and the guy's wife, her hair looked exactly like Florence Henderson, but her face looked like Marty Feldman. You know who Marty Feldman was?
Yeah.
Son of Frank. So I walk by, and I say to the Marty Feldman, I said, "Florence, do you want to go get Chinese food or Italian food?" I said, "Oh, my God. Oh, my God." She said, "Everywhere I go. Didn't I tell you? Everywhere I go." Now, Florence is kicking me on. And every time we'd get together, she'd tell everybody, "You know what this idiot did to me?"
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, I know you're a big Cubs fan, obviously. That's no secret. So you are tied with the record, right, for singing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." So when are you doing it this year?
I'm doing it in September. Every year, Harry Carey, the announcer for the Cubs, God rest his soul, every seventh inning, he would sing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." "Take me out to the ball game." He couldn't sing, which is great because he couldn't sing. They don't care if you can't sing. One year I followed Mike Ditka, and wow. they thought I was Pavarotti after Mike, because Mike sang worse than Harry. But they let celebrities sing. Sometimes they'll have a visual of Harry singing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" in the seventh inning, but they let celebrities do it. So I've done it 22 years or something. Joe Mantegna and I were tied for the most celebrities to do it, but Joe couldn't do it last year, so now I'm one.
Oh, nice. Got the lead. Yeah. So speaking of some more great Cubs memories, someone I work with, her name's Kim Green. Her dad was Dallas Green, and I've heard you mention him before, so I just wondering if you have any good memories of him.
Oh, yeah, her dad was Dallas Green?
Yeah.
Oh, tell her, give her my best. Will you tell her that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved her dad. Her dad was with Philadelphia before he came to the Cubs, but at that time, he started a thing. He wanted to start a thing because I was a big Cub fan, and I talked about the Cubs on The Tonight Show, on a lot of shows. It was no secret that I was a Cub fan. So they started a thing called the Chicago Cubs fan club. I was the first president of the Chicago Cubs fan club, and Dallas set that up, and I'd go to Cub conventions and all that stuff. And anyhow, yeah, he was a very knowledgeable baseball guy and fun to be around. Yeah, I thought there were. And then later on, Jim Fry was the manager of the Cubs, and he let me be bat boy. For 4 years, I was celebrity bat boy. I'd go into Chicago and I'd appear at Zany's Comedy Club. Cubs were only playing day games in those days, so I'd appear at Zany's Comedy Club during the evening. But the Cubs would during the day. I'd be the bat boy. They would all come to my shows.
Cool.
There were two rookies on that team at the time that I still have pictures on the wall. I'll show you later on. Moyer and Greg Maddox.
Nice. Greg Maddox. He's a friend of the show.
Is he really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He's a dear friend of mine. I'd go do his shows. He'd have a golf tournament in Las Vegas. Yeah, but Greg was a rookie in those days. And at that time, he was a skinny little kid with glasses. And Rick Sutcliffe, the pitcher, Rick was always pulling tricks on me. He would put tar down on the seat. Tommy, come and sit. And I'd sit down on the tire in the dugout. He was always pulling stuff on me. Rick took a styrofoam cup with Kool-Aid. He'd have a pencil. He'd stick a pencil in a hole, and he'd put his finger on it. Now, he'd tell the WGN camera, focus on me in between innings. Focus on me, and I'm going to have Dreesen sitting next to me. So WGN camera would be on, and Rick would say, I got to go. Tom, hold this for me. And I'd hold it, and all the water all the Kool-Aid was all over my uniform, and it would be on the evening news. So when Rick says to me in the locker room, see that kid? He said, Tommy, this kid, and a little skinny kid with glasses. He said, he could pick the hair out of your nose. That's how accurate he is. He said, he's really, and I go, he's a locker room kid. That's what I'm thinking. But it was Greg Maddox,
Wow.
Now, I go back, jump ahead. Years go by. Greg Maddox, his last year, he went from the Braves. He went to the Cubs for 1 year in the end of his career. And I'm going to throw out the first pitch. So the girl's going to take me out to the mound. I said, tell Greg Maddox I want him to catch for me. She said, oh, Mr. Dreesen, I can't go. I said, tell him, just say, Tom Dreesen wants to know, would you catch, the ball for him? So I said, please do it. She came back. I can't believe it. He said, because he's my buddy.
Yeah.
So he comes out. Now, he was a Gold Glove pitcher. He was a Gold Glove, for I think 8 or 10 times. Anyhow, so now I'm on the mound, and I try to fire one, and it goes into the dirt between his legs up against the backboard. The camera crews come running up, and they said, you know what happened? Greg said, Dreesen threw a knuckle slider. I've never seen a pitch like that in my life. He said, and they come to me, and they said, what happened? I said, this guy's got a Gold Glove. I thought he could handle my stuff. That's the only reason I asked for him, So we joked about that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, you kind of mentioned it when you said how the Cubs only played day games. So I was wondering, when the lights came in, were you for it or against it when you think about it?
At first, I wanted to keep the tradition going, but then I realized the Cubs couldn't possibly compete because you play under the sun all season long. By September, and it's going to wear you out. Also, there were times they had to return the night before, like 1 o'clock in the morning, and they had a game that day at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So other teams didn't have to do that. Then I started thinking lights in Wrigley, and then I wore a T-shirt saying "Let there be lights," and I'm so glad that they do have lights because night games at Wrigley Field are a lot of fun to go to.
Exactly. Well, I was wondering, since you did tour with Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr., who was your actual first concert you ever attended?
First concert I ever attended, to be honest with you, was a Frank Sinatra concert.
Oh, really?
Yeah, my cousin had gotten 2 tickets up in the in the Bob Uecker seats, way up in this huge auditorium in Chicago where the Blackhawks play, right?
Okay.
At that time, the old Blackhawks Stadium. So I was way up there. You almost need like a binoculars to look down there. But that was the first concert I'd ever seen that big of that magnitude, And yeah, that was very impressive, very impressive. And I saw the comedian. His name was Pat Henry. He came out, and I thought, how could a comedian do what he does in this big arena? And years later, I was doing the same thing.
Yeah, you were the guy.
By the way, back to baseball. We're in Chicago. I'm watching a Cub game in Frank's suite. Frank had gone to get something in the other room, and I changed over to the Cub game, come back, and Harry Carey was singing. And we were at the Ambassador East. Harry Carey stayed at the Ambassador East in Chicago. So, and Frank said, I got to go teach Harry how to sing that song, So anyhow, they both liked it. Frank didn't go to bed till the sun came up, and Harry liked to drink in all the bars on Rush Street. So one night I got them two together in the pump room at the Ambassador East to see who could outdrink who. At 4:30 in the morning, Harry Carey said, "You got me, Frank." He went to bed. Frank got him,
Oh, that's awesome. Well, an interesting fact that I thought about you was the fact that you said earlier you were the only white guy to go on Soul Train, right? So what was that experience like?
Well, it was fun. And Don Cornelius knew me from Chicago. The host of Soul Train, he had a show in Chicago on an off-station, Channel 26, Soul Train in Chicago, when he came out here. I was the only white comedian to do Soul Train, and later I got a friend of mine on that show, Arsenio Hall.
Wow.
I talked to Don Cornelius and got Arsenio Hall. He always used to joke about it. He said, a white boy got me on a black TV show, But, I had worked in front of black audience. I grew up in a predominantly black neighborhood, and I worked in front of a black audience, and I was very comfortable at doing that. And even to this day, people would say to me, how could you work in front of an all-black audience? And I always say the same thing. What color is laughter? What's the color of laughter? So anyhow, what happened was I went on the Tonight Show, and I my first Tonight Show, and I did a routine about playing basketball on an all-black basketball team, playing football on an all-black football team, and I had jokes about it and everything like that. And Don Cornelius calls me about a week later. He said, my partner, and I can't remember his partner's name, he said he got a hold of my number and called me at home, but I knew him from Chicago. And he said, my partner said, I saw a white boy on the Tonight Show talking about black folks, and he was making it funny. And Don Cornelius said, I told him, I only know one white boy that could do that. His name is Tom Dreesen. He said, that's who it is. He said, how do you know him? Don said, well, I knew him from Chicago, you know. And anyhow, long story short, he got me on Soul Train, and I do you want to do it? I said, yeah, of course I'll do it, you know.
So after reading your book, but one of the stories I loved in it was when you talked about Johnny Carson, and Frank Sinatra kind of saved his life in a way, right?
Oh, wow. Not kind of. I was a big fan of Johnny Carson, and he made my career. I mean, God bless him. But Frank Sinatra saved his life, and that's a true story. And the only reason that I ever wrote it in my book was because Johnny Carson's manager, Henry Bushkin, wrote a book, and he took credit for that incident that saved Johnny Carson's life. At that time, he was like a 24 or 25-year-old lawyer. It was against a guy named, a guy from New York, was a Joey Gallo. They called him Crazy Joey Gallo. He was a mobster, and the five dons of New York, you know, there's five dons of New York, Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, Manhattan, or whatever it is, the boroughs, and they ruled New York, and they gave out the orders. He disobeyed them all the time. He did whatever he wanted. He was a renegade with the mob. And Johnny Carson had a run-in with him one night, and Joey Gallo was going to kill Johnny Carson. And to me, no one could have saved his life but Frank Sinatra. But the only reason I know about the story is Julie Rizzo, Frank's bodyguard, told me the story verbatim one night of what really happened. And 3 weeks later on Frank's jet, when we were flying somewhere, Frank brought it up and told me the same exact story verbatim of what happened. And it goes like this. Julie Rizzo had a bar in New York. I think it was on West 58th or West 48th Street or something. Julie's bar. Anyhow, way before my time, of course. Johnny Carson had only been doing the Tonight Show for a couple of years in New York. He later moved out here to California, as you know. But in New York, he was just a new star, a new late-night talk show host. And Julie's bar was where everybody went in New York. I mean, all the who's who. I always say all the cops and the robbers. That's what Julie said. The FBI would go in there, and the mob guys would go in there. Stars would go in there. It was a place to go. And Frank Sinatra, of course, went there. And that would made it another reason to go there, you know. So one night, Joey Gallo comes in with two of his gumads. In an Italian world, if you're single and you have a girlfriend, she's your girlfriend. But if you're married and you have a girlfriend, she's your gumad. Your gumadi, you know. And in Chicago, gumadis are sacred. I always say there's three holidays for an Italian guy in Chicago. It's St. Joseph's birthday, St. Rocco's birthday, and December 23rd. That's Gumadi Christmas Eve, you know. So there's a lot of jokes about it. I do in my accent. But Joey Gallo comes in, and he's got two of these young chicks and two other guys with him, and I guess they had the mini skirts on and everything in those days. And he said, Julie, I need to talk to these guys. Can I use the back room? And Julie said, sure, and he left the two girls at the bar. Moments later, Johnny Carson comes in, according to Julie and according to Frank Sinatra, the story. Johnny Carson comes in, and Johnny, by his own admission, was a bad drinker. He didn't, you know, I was a bartender for years. Some guys react real well to alcohol, and other guys get stupid and silly, you know. But Johnny he was like a high school sophomore when he had a few drinks. So he comes in the bar, and people turn around and recognize him. He goes like this, and he sneaks up behind the girl, and he puts his hand up her dress, goes, hey! So Julie jumps over the bar, comes running up to Ed McMahon, grabs him by the arm, and Ed had the wherewithal to know that something was wrong, and he said, get him out of here fast, get him out of here fast. So Ed McMahon took Johnny out the door, and the girl kept screaming, ah, ah, ah. Now she's hyperventilating, ah. Crazy Joey Gallo comes out of the back room, and again, this is Julie's story telling me, and Frank later telling me the same thing. But she said she was like hyperventilating, and Joey said, what's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? And she, and he cracks her, pow, and she hits the floor like a ton of bricks. She said, Johnny Carson reached up my dress and find him. Can I tell you what he actually said in this?
Yeah.
Can I?
Oh, yeah.
He said, find him, beat his ass to the ground, cut his dick off, and put it in his mouth. Wow. Now, and these two big guys went out there, and he turned on Julie. He said, you let that son of a bitch, you know, with my gumad, you know, you let, and Julie said, Joey, I'm behind the bar. I didn't say anything. I just, you know, excuse me. And he was pacing. He was angry as hell, you know, pacing. These guys come back in about 5 minutes later. Julie said it would sweat all over him, so we can't find him. So now the word is all over New York that Johnny's a dead man. It got the word like wildfire traveled all around. The next day, Dave Tevitt, a guy from NBC who was a top-notch guy at NBC, Jilly said he came to Jilly's place and said, Jilly, we got to have a sit-down. Can you talk to Joey Gallo about Johnny? And Jilly said, the five Dons of New York can't talk to Joey Gallo. You want me to talk to him? He said, could you ask Frank? Jilly went to Frank. By that time, Frank had heard it. And he said, and Frank said the same thing. He said, Jilly said, they want you to talk to Joey Gallo. Frank said, me? The five Dons of New York can't talk to him. You want me to talk to him? But anyhow, as it turns out, Frank was appearing in town like a week later at one of those places. I can't remember, the Rainbow Grill or something. But anyhow, the way he told the story was, meanwhile, Johnny's coming in the back door. He's hiding, he's scared to death. But it's all over the city that something might happen to him. So Frank is appearing there, and Joey Gallo came with his family and everything, and had like 2 tables. And after the show, came backstage with the family. Frank took pictures, signed autographs, all that kind of stuff. All the family left Joey Gallo, and both Frank and him tell this story verbatim. Joey Gallo says to Frank, he called him Cheech, in Italian, Francesco Cheech. If a guy's saying, I call Frankie Valli Cheech, hey Cheech, But anyhow, he says to him, he said, hey Cheech, what you did for my family, I'll never forget. It meant the world to me. He said, if I can ever do anything for you, just say that. And Frank said, there is something. And Joey Gallo, the way Jilly told the story, especially, he said Joey Gallo put his hands in front of Frank's face. He said, name it. He said, Johnny Carson. And Joey Gallo grabbed his mouth and held Frank's mouth real tight, holding it like, and Jilly said, so hard that when he took his hand off his face, he said you could see the fingerprints on the side of Frank's face. He grabbed me, he said, you stick up for that piece of shit that, put his hand up my gomad's dress. And Frank said, Joey, he didn't know. He didn't know. I mean, he didn't know it was just. He said, I don't care any woman. He's got a talk show. He can do that to women. No. He said, he's a dead man. He's a dead. And Frank said, he didn't mean it. He knows you're a man of respect. He knows he'd come to you right now on his knees, but he's scared to death. And he said, but he's a nice guy. He's really a good guy, and he didn't mean it. He had too much to drink, and he just begs your forgiveness. And he said that Julie and Frank both told us right. He started pacing. He looked and he started to pace and he paced. And finally he went to the door. He opened up the door and he said, you go tell Johnny Carson he breathes because he knows Frank Sinatra. And he goes like this. In Vegas, whenever the dealers get done, they clear their hand. He said, he breathes because he knows Frank Sinatra. And it's over. So, and it was all over. Now, months go by. And funny, like 6 months go by. Johnny's starting to come out now. And Johnny goes into Julie's bar one night. He's sitting in a booth with a girl, and Frank and those guys were crazy. They used to take these cherry bombs and throw them out of limos and stuff. They took a cherry bomb, Frank took a cherry bomb, and he threw it under the booth. And Johnny's sitting over there going, wham, it went off. They said the blood drained out of his face, and he slid down the booth. And if you ever watch the old Johnny Carson reruns, there's one particular show where Ed McMahon said, what'd you do last night? He said, I went out, around town. And he paused and he said, those guys at Julie's have a strange sense of humor, and that was from that night, Anyhow, that's a story.
That's a great story.
Only reason I told it, those stories, there's a lot of things that I know of Frank that I did with Frank that I would never tell anybody because it was personal. Mm-hmm. But I only want to tell that story because his manager, Johnny's manager at that time, Henry Bushkin, his lawyer, was taking credit for that, his lawyer. And he was like 25 years old at the time. I didn't think, only Frank Sinatra could have got him out of that. That's my opinion. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a great story, and there's many others in your great book, Still Standing.
Speaking of that, this cheap plug, this is my book, Still Standing, My Journey from Streets and Saloons to the Stage and Sinatra.
Love it.
And I'm not really trying to hustle it. It's got 455-star reviews on Amazon. I'm so proud of that book because it took a lot of years to put those stories together. And I originally was doing it because I wanted my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren, when they say, what was your grandfather like? At least I'd have a book. And also, everywhere I worked, when I started out in show business, I so loved show business. If something poignant happened or something funny happened, I'd go back to the room and I'd journal it. Something poignant, something I learned a lesson, or something funny, I'd always journal it. Anyhow, and I'm so proud of the book. It's really doing real good. And I have a lot of fun with it,
Yeah, it was a great book, and it's on my under the TV mantle area when I put some of my favorite books. So I got it up on there.
I appreciate that. I really do.
Well, I wanted to wrap it up here with some golf questions, because even just being in your house here, I see a lot of golf. So you had the Tom Dreesen Celebrity Classic, right? You had that for many years, right?
Many years. Also, I was a caddy when I was a boy. Golf changed my life. I had 8 brothers and sisters. We lived in a shack. I was poor. I caddied in the summer to help feed my brothers and sisters. But when I went to that environment, the golf environment, I was a kid. I was 11 years old the first time I started caddying. When I was growing up, I always thought one day I'd like to be a bartender or own a bar, because that's where my dad spent all of his money. I thought tavern owners were stars. They had their names out in front, Eddie's Bar and Grill, stuff like that. That's what I wanted. I couldn't think outside of my environment. I understand today when a young ghetto kid says, I want to grow up to become a pimp or a drug pusher, that's the only successful man he sees in his environment. New cars, finely clothes, $100 bills. We don't often think outside of our neighborhood. When I started caddying, all of a sudden I'm caddying for lawyers and doctors and Mr. Florsheim and very successful men and women in the Chicagoland area. I started to think maybe I could be more than just a bartender or tavern owner. Because I started getting out of my environment. So golf always meant a lot to me. Now, when I played golf as a kid a little bit, I'd borrow the members' clubs because I couldn't afford golf clubs. So I played golf. And then when I went in the service and I came back, I just didn't play golf anymore. The guys would say, I'm working construction, I'm wheeling concrete or working on the loading dock, and you get a day off Sunday. Tom, you want to play golf? Yeah, we're teeing off at 6:30 in the morning. I ain't teeing off at 6. So now years go by, and I'm touring with Sammy Davis Jr., and he liked golf. He had a golf tournament in the pro tournament called the Sammy Davis Jr. Pro-Am in Hartford, Connecticut, a PGA Tour stop. So, he, one day in Vegas, I'm going out with him just to ride around when he's playing golf. He had a cart like an apartment. It had a refrigerator. It had a TV set, a golf cart.
Holy cow.
It had everything you wanted in it, But, at one point, I pulled one of his clubs out, and I was swinging the club. He said, you got a nice golf swing. Do you play? I said, no, I haven't played in years. Anyhow, Bob Hope then sees me on the Tonight Show and invites me to the Bob Hope golf tournament. So I played in the Bob Hope Classic for years. I played in the AT&T for 20-something years. My partners were John Daly. Peter Jacobson was a great friend of mine. I played in his the Fred Meyer Challenge every year. Peter and I were partners in tournaments. Chichi Rodriguez. Lee Trevino. I'm meeting all these people, these heroes of mine. And then they started a golf tour called the Celebrity Players Tour. It was basketball, baseball, football, hockey, tennis, and show business people that were 10 handicap or below. Johnny Bench, Mike Schmidt, Mario Lemieux, John Elway, Dan Marino, Michael Jordan. 42 Hall of Famers. Show business, it was Eddie Marinero, Smokey Robinson, Frankie Avalon, Jack Wagner, me, Ray Romano played on for a while. But you had to be a 10 handicap or below. At one time, I was the only comedian. So whenever they'd introduce me, they'd say, he's the leading money winner among stand-up comedians on the tour. They'd say, how many are on there, Tom? I said, me. But Rick Rhoden won over $2 million on that tour. We got paid to play golf. Everybody got paid. So, by how you perform. Mm-hmm. So if you would have told me when I was a little boy, a raggedy kid with holes in my shoes, shining shoes, and I love sports, I played every sport I could, but if you'd have told me one day when you get older, you hear that guy in the jukebox, come fly with me, you're going to be flying with Frank Sinatra all over the world, and you're going to be gracing the same stage as Frank Sinatra. And at the same time, you're going to get inside of an arena, and you're going to be competing with the greatest athletes that ever lived in your lifetime. I'd say, that is impossible. You're out of your mind. But I was doing that. I was competing with all these great athletes, and it became so much fun. And then the hanging out, Jimmy, afterward. You know how many times I said, we're in the locker room. Now they start telling the stories of what really happened, not the watered down version you see on TV. I thought if there was a camera right there, what a show this would be.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so that's my golf experience. And I'm a member at Lakeside Golf Club here in L.A. When I'm off the road, I'll play 3, 4, 5 days a week if I can. Then I'll work till midnight that night, trying to get caught up on all my other stuff. But I compete because we have a gambling game. And ironically, they call it the Rat Pack, but it was way before the Rat Pack. Like in 1940, this group of men at Lakeside Golf Club got together calling the Rat Pack, 30, 40 guys that were gamblers. And you had individual bets with everybody. And, now we got about 16 real good players. And and the stakes are high, but I love it. It's exciting as hell, you know.
Well, I'll stay away then because I'm just a slicer, so I don't want to get in on that.
Yeah, so was OJ, you know.
Oh yeah,
I hate to do that. That's a bad joke. It's a bad joke. By the way, I met him.
it's a good one.
I met him on the golf course, you know, and he was a nice guy, but he turned out not to be a nice guy.
Yeah.
What he did, but you know, what are you going to do? You know? I mean, the other thing for a comedian, why you want to? I tell young comedians all the time. You know why you want to do golf tournaments? I got a lot of corporate dates from golf tournaments because in that. Every time you do a golf tournament, at the end of the last night or something, the awards banquet, they'd say, Tom, would you get up and do 5 minutes? Why they want comedians? If you're going to get a singer, he's got to have the band, he's got to have rehearsal, you got to fly in the band, you got to pay the musicians. Comedian, but you get up and do 5 minutes, you know. I'd get up and do 5-10 minutes. I'd come off stage. A guy from Allstate would hand me his card. Listen, I'm with Allstate. We'd like to talk about hiring you. I was corporate dates. I was getting more corporate dates because the Fortune 500 companies were in the audience. You know, everywhere we perform, especially the Bob Hope Classic, the AT&T. You know, it's a lucrative thing for comedians to do if you can play golf. You know.
Yeah. Well, like you said, I see Ray Romano, Nate Bargatze. They're big golfers. So
Ray Romano played on our tour at one time, and they paired us. Ray's a good friend of mine. I think he's one of the most unaffected stars I've ever met in my life. He's a nice kid from Queens. He's a neighborhood guy.
Friend of the show, too.
Is he? Well,
yeah.
Well, God bless him. Because I love Ray Romano. He's just a nice guy. He really is. And I'll never forget, an avid golfer. He had never broke 80. And we're playing up in San Diego, and Ray Romano was on the 16th tee with me. He said, Tom, if I par out, I break 80 for the first time. I said, really? He said, yeah. And, you know, he bogeys the next hole, but he birdies the next hole. And the 18th hole was a par 3. And he's close again, and he puts up this close, tap in. He's going to shoot 79 and break 80. There's a microphone there. All the people are there, all the crowd, the gallery. Me and my stupid big mouth, I grabbed the microphone and said, ladies and gentlemen, one of the hard-workingest comedian and golfer and one of the most improved golfers on our Celebrity Players Tour, Ray Romano. You're about to see history. This is his first time that he breaks 80, and he missed that putt. I could have died. Now, years go by, and he still hadn't done it, but he finally did it. He would call me from the golf course or send me a video. I'm coming up 18 if I par this hole, and then he'd bogey the hole. The other thing about Ray Romano, if he was playing alone, he never gave himself a putt. He never would infringe him. If he swung and the club head went underneath the ball, he counts that. He's an honest guy about the game. He plays the game the way it's supposed to be played.
Wow. You know? Well, Tom, this was great to have you on the show again, come down to L.A. and see you in your element or at your house. So thanks for letting me come down, and thanks for going over some great memories.
Well, I'm happy to do it. You know, as you know, I'm a man of few words. And I'll tell you a terrible story real quick. Years ago, my manager, a guy called my manager many years ago. He was at a talk show in Canada. He said, I'm going to introduce your client, Mr. Weissman. He said, Tom Dreesen, can you give me some questions that would open him up to some stories? He said, ask him how his day went and then get the hell out of his way. I was so embarrassed with that, but he was right, you know.
Well, what are you doing tonight? What's on the agenda? Or now, can you relax because you had a busy day?
Yeah, I really had a busy day. I've got a couple calls to make, and then I'm going to go get some Chinese food.
Nice.
What are you doing?
Nothing really.
You want to have Chinese food?
Yeah, let's do it.
Wrap this up, and I'll take you to a Chinese restaurant a couple blocks down the street.
All right, that's it for the Jim and Bay Show. We're going to go have some Chinese food. All right, thanks, Tom.
Okay, you're welcome. Glad to do it.